Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very special guest coming right up who's none other than John Edward. Now, many of you know John from his television show, Crossing Over with John Edward, that was on the Sci-Fi Network. It was a huge success. John has brought a fresh, honest, and thought-provoking attitude to the world of psychic phenomenon. As a medium, author, and lecturer, he has over 3 decades helping people with his uncanny ability to predict future events and communicate with those who have crossed over to the other side. John is one of the country's foremost psychic mediums and the author of the highly acclaimed New York Times bestsellers, One Last Time, Crossing Over, The Stories Behind the Stories, What If God Were the Sun, AfterLife, Answers from the Other Side, Practical Praying, Using the Rosary to Enhance Your Life, Final Beginnings, Infinite Quest, and Fallen Masters. So let's welcome to the show John Edward.
Thank you for having me.
What a joy it is to have you here. You're just like the guru of the afterworld, and I was so delighted to hear about all these great events you're having all across the world. I just had to have you on my show.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I like to travel and I like to teach, so blending both worlds kind of really cool.
Oh, how extraordinary is that? But before we get too far ahead, I would love for you to share with our audience, just when you found out initially that you had this extraordinary gift that you have.
I was 15 when I met a woman by the name of Lydia Clark. She was doing readings at my grandmother's home. And during the course of her doing a reading for me, where I initially was going there to kind of debunk her, to be honest, she basically told me that I was going to change the way millions of people looked at her field. Now, at the time, I was 15. There was nothing remotely even psychic about me that was conscious. I would make fun of the subject matter, to be really brutally honest. And she really changed my life. Like everything that she told me that I would do, I subsequently have done, whether it be books or TV or touring the world. So yeah, she kind of put me on my path and said, hey, by the way, you have this ability. And then I ran with it. And what I find interesting about that story is that she wouldn't train me. Like that's the part that I always like, kind of when I think about it, when people ask me, I always go back to me going to her like she would be my Mr. Miyagi and say, can you teach me how to use this ability? And she said, no, you have to go find it for yourself. You have to discover it on your own. And I was so disappointed when she told me that, but so grateful now that she did.
Well, and obviously it's led you to where you are today because you have been able to develop your gift in a way that you can teach other people, like how they can at least work on their gifts. Because a lot of times I think a lot of people get confused. I'm like, well, which way do I turn?
Right. I like to, right from the beginning, I'd like to just say that it's a normal phrase to use, like somebody has a gift, right? I like to take the word gift and take it away, and I turn it into a 4-letter word. I add it to like the other 4-letter words when it comes to the psychic community, because when someone uses the word gift, sometimes they hide behind it, and it becomes a shield for their ego. So what I like people to know is that everybody has the ability. Everybody has psychic ability. Everybody has intuition. And once we come from that spot, it's like specifically saying, I have biceps. So you don't say, I'm gifted because I'm strong. You basically say, I work out, I've developed my strength. So I feel like when we give it the same kind of analogy, it takes it away from the category of unconscious ego, what I call the inner monster at play, and then we put it to a conscious working at something, which is an ability and something that you can develop.
I love that because it makes it available for everybody, not just an elite few.
Yeah, I remember being a kid. I was probably like 16 at the time, and I started working at a psychic fair. And I remember there was these psychics that were there were like, 40s and their 50s and 60s. They were doing this work for years. And one of the women turned around on my first day there, and she was like, "Are you good?" And I looked at her. I was like, "Excuse me?" She's like, "Are you good?" I'm like, try to be as accurate as possible. Like it was such an interesting question because, what is good? How do you define good? Well, in her terminology was, am I good meant, am I going to take her clients away? Wait, was I good? And the other psychic sitting next to her was like, leave him alone, he's just a kid. And what they did is a lot of them made me feel like there was this elitist kind of an energy, like they were all the way up here and I was all the way down there, and good luck, kid, learning the ropes. And what I learned really, really quickly is that we were all on the same kind of playing field, but where we were different was in our perspective of the ability.
I love that. Because it does bring a fresh perspective to be able to just see things that other people typically don't. And that's why I think you've had the level of success that you've had.
And not really caring about accomplishments. Like, does that make sense? Like, I kind of feel like you're as good as your last reading, and if I had a shitty last reading, I don't know if I can say that, sorry, but if I had a crappy last reading, then I feel pretty crappy. Like, if I can't get the information through, or if I can't get that client to understand what I'm seeing, I'm not done with that reading and go, I'm a 9 times New York Times bestseller, whatever it is. Like, it means nothing. It means absolutely nothing when you're in the middle of doing a reading for someone and you can't get them to understand what you're saying. So I feel like you always have to be a little bit on the edge of understanding you're still a student of the universe when you do this work, and you never rest on your accomplishments of, well, look who I am, or look what I did, because it doesn't really matter, because now it's over.
Exactly. on to the next thing. Well, and so as a kid, so you're at these fairs doing this, and is that something that you just continue to follow through adulthood, or were there other interests that pulled at your heart as well?
Well, what happened for me is I had this reading with this woman, Lydia, and my mom's side of the family was very into psychics, and then my mom had gone to a psychic fair, and she brought back a whole bunch of business cards. And she said, why don't you go to somebody else and see if somebody else sees in you what Lydia saw? And I was like, oh, good idea. Can I do that? And she goes, yeah, let me just go check out these people first and make sure they're not like, wacky people. I was 15, so she's like, well, make sure it's okay. So I picked somebody who did rune casting, a woman by the name of Maria D'Andrea, and I was doing the reading with her, and she's reading me, looking at the runes, and she's giving me information, and then all of a sudden she stopped, and she looked at me, and she said, wow, do you know how psychic you are? And it was like this really weird moment where I guess I should have been like, well, I've been told this before, but I didn't go there. I went to this place of like, wait a minute. Like, is this like psychic shtick? Like, is that like a thing that like everybody tells people? Because she said it in such a matter-of-fact way that it wasn't like, hey, do you ever feel like you're psychic? Or, hey, do you ever get like intuitive moments that you think you could develop? It wasn't like that. It was more like, wow, do you know how psychic you are? So it kind of put me off a little bit, and then she got up from the reading and went to the phone and started making a phone call, which I thought was the most unprofessional thing possible. And she called the woman that works the psychic fairs, a woman by the name of Sheila, and she said, I'm sitting with a young gentleman, his name is John. And she looked at me, she goes, your name is John, right? And I went, yeah. And she goes, he's extremely psychic, and he's going to come work at the fairs. I want you to meet him. And she said, come meet me this Sunday at, the Snug Harbor in Staten Island. And I remember like going like, oh, like in my head, I'm like, oh my God, like, first of all, that's unprofessional. You got up from my reading. Second of all, you're making a phone call. Third of all, you're calling somebody who runs a psychic fair and asking me to come to it. And I'm like, it was like a little bit like psychic overload. Like it was just information overload. And then the woman sat down and I said, I don't know like what all this is, but like, I don't do this. She goes, no, you do this. She goes, you're just not letting yourself admit that you do it. And I was like, well, no, like I've investigated tarot and I've investigated stuff. I go, but like investigating it and doing it, I mean, I've read for a couple of people, but like, I can't do this. And she says, just go meet Sheila. And that's how like the journey began. And when I did the psychic fairs, I would read like 25 people every Sunday, like every 15 minutes. It was like, it's like the Olympics of psychic development and training. And I loved it. And I loved it until my guides, because we all have guides who have a team of energy that work with us. I loved it until they made me not love it. And it was like a switch. Like, I'm done here. Like, I remember I could literally tell you where I was on the Long Island Expressway, driving out to Danford's Inn in Port Jefferson, when I knew I was done. Like, this was going to be my last event. And I didn't go back after that the way I had gone Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. And it was a good 6 years, maybe. Like, I did that for a good 6, maybe longer, 7 years. It could even be longer. I have to go back and, like, look. But, like, I knew I was done. Like, it was time to graduate to what was next.
What a beautiful, life story. Because, I mean, you get to these points, and I think everyone does in their life, where they're working on a path and maybe they plateau and they're kind of at this point where it's like, gosh, I don't think I can do this, or this is really for me. And it's time to kind of reinvestigate things.
Yeah, I'm pretty good when it comes to recognizing stuff like that. Like when Crossing Over was in its 4th year, and they weren't sure if it was going to move on, and they were thinking they were going to cancel the show, and the production company was being bought out by another network, and they needed to make sure that it was a very, I don't know what the proper word is, not cost prohibitive, but financially successful vehicle for them in their portfolio of being acquired and the acquisition and all that kind of stuff. They wound up firing my staff. Like, they took the staff of Crossing Over, like the key people who were the people who really understood what my mission was and what I wanted and what I didn't want. Like, and what I didn't want was a television show. Like, I wanted these to be events that were televised, but I didn't want a produced, slick show. Not back then. So all the key people were kind of fired. And the people that were their underlings that were working underneath them were now empowered to be the people who were in charge, but to report to not me, to the people that were at the network. So I knew at that moment I was done, and I got released from my contract. And I was like, I can't be here. Like, I can't be here and not know that these people's experiences are going to be treated with respect. I can't be here and say, past this date. So when all of these people were fired, I made sure that my out was like, I basically fired myself. Like, I made sure that I was off the show from then on. And I was like, listen, it says Crossing Over with. Maybe it's going to be with somebody else, but it ain't going to be with me past this date. So, like, I knew that I was done. Like, I knew that I could, like, it was clear, like, I can't be here.
And when you get these moments where you're feeling that clarity, the spirit just immediately show you, hey, we've got something else in store for you, or it's just to trust your gut?
You know what? I think that last part is the important, trust your gut. And I think for folks that are listening to this, I don't ever surrender myself. I am the one who's responsible for my choices. Like, the clarity that I get, I have the ability to act on it or not act on it. And I think a lot of people that are listening to this that might be in a relationship that they know is bad for them, they already know. They have the clarity that the relationship is bad, but the fear is what stops them from acting on it. So you have to have the love of self in order to make sure that the fear of what's next doesn't get in the way. So for me, it's always owning my choices. So I don't blame my guides. I don't blame anybody in spirit. I basically say thank you for the information, but it's my karmic responsibility in this lifetime to make my choices, and only I am responsible for those choices. So, yeah, when that clarity message comes, I think we have to trust our gut in that knowing and say this is, what's right for me. And, I'm a product of the 80s when past life regression therapy and channeling was the in thing, and mediumship was not. People would look at me all the time and be like, why do you do that? I'm like, because it's what I do. It's like, like, oh, no, you should become a certified past life regressionist because that's what people want. I'm like, okay, then they could go to the people who do that. I'm not that person. This is what I do. So I think when you know who you are and you know what you do, then you stay in kind of your proper alignment and your energy can be clear. I remember people during that period of time, I would read for them and they would say, I would see like this one woman stands out strongly for me. She didn't have a job. And not only did she have a job, but she expected her parents to take care of her in her 20s. She expected her boyfriend to take care of her. Everything was an expectation that these other people were going to do stuff. And she was very, very bold about it. So during the course of the reading, I said to her, you have issues with responsibility, but yet you choose to have issues with responsibility. What's up with that? And she goes, well, I don't know if you're seeing this, but I had a regression done, and in a past life, I was a slave. So I'm working through this lifetime. I'm working through that karma. So I don't have to work in this lifetime, and I'm going to be taken care of. I remember going, no. I'm like, that's not how this works. I'm like, no, not. And I fired her as a client. I said, you can't come back to me. And she said, why? I said, because you're taking information and you're manipulating it to be what you want. I go, the truth is, you're lazy and you don't want to work. That's your choice. And you're blaming it on a past life. I go, that's not acceptable. So for me, it's like, I think it's really important to own our choices. And sure, maybe in a past life she was a slave, but that doesn't mean you don't work. I go, nobody's going to pay your mortgage. Like, and you're going to be in for a harsh reality. So like, here's your wake up call.
Well, and one can only imagine the karmic, backlash that's kind of that's just being amassed by doing something like that, where you're using other people, as opposed to taking personal responsibility for your own journey.
Yeah, I take karma really, really seriously. Like that the energy of the universe to me is always inhaling and exhaling in some way. And I always want to be part of the inhale. I don't want to be part of the exhale. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like when we're bringing in, because I look at meditation, you bring in the positive, you inhale the positive, and you exhale the negative. So I don't want to be part of what the universe is exhaling in a negative way. I want to make sure that I'm in a good current. I want to ride the wave in positively. And I think we always have to be very, very diligent, careful, responsible about our thoughts and choices.
I think that's so important. And I really applaud you for sharing also about how you feel about our spirit guides, because a lot of times when people get information from a guide, team member, somebody from the other side, they take it and they're like, oh, okay, well, I'll just do this, and regardless if it'll work out or it won't work out. And then there is sometimes where people lay blame to, well, spirit told me to do this, and that's why it's worked out this way, as opposed to going, well, I'm the one who made the decision to follow this instruction. I really applaud you for that.
Well, they're spirit guides. They're not spirit doers. They're spirit guides. They're there to guide you. They're there to give you insights. They're not to do things for us. And I'll tell folks all the time during readings and even events, I'll say stuff like, they can intervene, but they cannot interfere. And some folks will never understand the difference between both because they see it as being the same. And I was like, they can't interfere if there's a lesson karmically that's being learned, but they can intervene to help make things easier, give an awareness, give us a little bit of an insight. So intervention and interference are two different things.
Mm. Well, and you touched on karma a little bit and about the exhale. Can you expand on that a little bit more for us? Kind of
so
how
I believe,
mm-hmm.
I believe that all of our actions and thoughts and choices have a ripple effect. I think energetically and scientifically that can be shown. You throw a penny in the pond, it ripples out in the water, right? There's a lot of different metaphors and different theologies in Buddhism that talk about what the action of karma is, and I think sometimes the use of it is not used properly. So in the most simplistic way that I look at it is that what am I thinking, what am I doing, how am I feeling, and how am I acting, and how does that affect the world around me? That world could be my dog, that world could be my children, that world could be my family, that world could be my clients, that world could be the person that's driving in the car next to me. Because if I change lanes and I don't look and there's a car there, I can cause an accident, right? That's now my responsibility and my fault. It's my actions that cause that. So I look at everything down to like how I deliver information to, I say this, how do I inspire with this information? Because I want to make sure that I'm being responsible. So if I'm doing an event, right, I do events all around the world. If I'm doing an event and I'm giving information, now I know that I'm about ready to deliver something that's personal in front of a room full of people. If I know that, you will always hear me say, may I be personal with you? Because I want that person who, by the way, by being in that room has already given me karmic permission universally to read for them. I want them to now give me permission to go one step further because I don't want the karmic responsibility of their reaction. I don't want to carry that. So if I deliver something, I want them to, they're going to now carry it. So I feel like what we're doing is we're saying, or what I'm implying, is that the words, your thoughts, and your actions and how they affect you and those around you could be perceived as the karma, because everything has an action and a reaction. You do something, it has a reaction, and if you don't do something, it can have a lack of reaction, which is a reaction all unto itself. So it puts you into the place of, are you going to be proactive in your thoughts, your emotions, your activity, your actions, your beliefs, and manifesting a reality, or are you going to be reactionary to stuff? So I try to get people to become proactive in what they're doing with a karmic understanding and responsibility, while understanding the patterns that they might be working with during the course of their reading, or if they've had their astrological chart done and they know what they're coming in with. Big picture thinking.
Yeah. I love that. I just love how you approach everything, John. I mean, you're one of my favorite people that deal with this topic. You're as far as being a psychic medium, and I just really applaud you. Well, I know oh, of course, my goodness, there's lots of different folks out there teaching different things, but your work and the way that you approach things have always resonated with me at such a high level, and I just applaud you. I know you're in the middle of this world tour that you're doing, and I'd love for you to kind of explain, you did a little bit right there, about what people can expect when they attend one of your events. What do those look like?
A classroom, really, in my head. One of the things that people will normally see is I'm going to be in a hotel ballroom. Now, jokingly I say this, but I think there's some partial truth to it, because my career began in hotel ballrooms and psychic fairs. I feel very comfortable in a hotel ballroom. So I will opt for a hotel ballroom scenario over a theater any day. And the reason is, if you put me in the theater, the audience now expects a performance. There's a stage, they're sitting in the theater, it's got a vibe of entertainment. And although I know people find this entertaining, I don't see what I do as entertainment. So again, the difference between intervene and interfere. So in a ballroom, I'm holding a class. I'm teaching a seminar. And in that moment, I want to create a sacred space that's going to leave people better than I find them. I want to inspire them and inform them, empower them to get them to evolve and transform where they're currently at, that they might see things a little bit differently. They might think about things a little bit differently. Maybe they're going to hear a reading that's going to shift their perspective in their life in a way that I didn't read for them, but they can identify with it, and it helps them to know that their loved ones and friends are okay as well. So for me, it's a 2-hour experience of raising awareness, teaching, answering questions, and reading for folks that are in the room.
And I'm sure with that comes, also a lot of healing for people who are, because when I've attended events, you see a lot of people that are still going through a great deal of grief. And at least that's been one of the number one things that I see. Is that the same for you?
I do. I kind of feel like people are categorically in different places. There's the student of the subject matter. There's the practitioner of the subject matter. There's the newly discovered person that this is aware because they might have had a recent loss. There are people who are stagnant and stuck in their life because of grief. So I feel like they're all coming from the same places. So if we were to equate this to hunger, there's different levels of hunger. There are people that are starving. There are people who are peckish. And there are people who are snacky, right? There are people who are hungry. So depending upon their appetite is going to depend upon what they're going to take away from the experience.
When people come to you and for the reading aspect of your event, what are some of the number one things that you see people kind of constantly request?
From a theme standpoint, I think that they want to know that they're okay. They want to know that their loved ones and friends are okay. That's probably the number one thing. I think that they also want to know that they're not alone, that they're with family members and friends who have gone before them, that they've met up, and that we stay connected in the afterlife, and that those folks are still connected to them, that they see what's happening in their life now, they see what's taking place, they see what's in their hearts, they know the things that maybe they didn't say, they recognize those things. So finishing up with unfinished business, kind of touching upon things that a period needs to be, in their minds, put an end to something, closure they're looking for. I kind of feel like we're looking more for connections than closure. But those things.
Yeah, those things all around. Well, and what a huge impact that makes on somebody's life. I mean, I've been at, I was actually at one of your events many moons ago, and it was pretty profound just watching the change that went through the room. And you could see people like they were just letting that grief go. And for me, it was a profound thing to watch. So
yeah, it's my favorite moment. One of my favorite moments is, I call it watching the lights go back on. Inside people's eyes, it's almost like there's an old lantern, and you can sometimes see the lantern get turned up and their eyes get brighter, where like the lights go on inside. That is a pretty amazing feeling, to know that you had something to do to get people to look at, there's more. Like, there's more. There's something else.
Yeah, there's definitely more beyond this. Well, you're so superb at connecting people with their loved ones. And when you're doing this connection, do you ever come across, maybe you're connecting somebody with a lost pet?
Oh, pets come through all the time. It is not uncommon for folks to be seen with their pets, or sometimes I'll get their names and they'll acknowledge that they're there. There'll be funny stories or anecdotal moments that have come through, or and usually pets get the biggest reaction in the crowd. Like, I could literally take attendance for a family, and I'll say, like, Fluffy the poodle's here, and the entire room is like, oh, it's like, what about Grandma? Like, doesn't Grandma get an awe? No, Grandma doesn't get an awe. Fluffy gets the awe.
Fluffy gets the awe, It must sometimes feel like spiritually you're almost got a three-ring circus going on around you.
I feel like I'm in the middle of this tornado of information, and then I just don't want to miss anything. So it's like, as all this stuff is downloaded to me, I want to make sure that I'm getting it across. And, if I could just say really clearly to folks that are listening, it's subtle. Hollywood's done a really bad job in the last decade when it comes to the way the subject matter is produced, where it seems like it's larger than life, or it's bigger, grandiose in some way. It's not. Energy is really subtle, and you've got to be quiet. You've got to be open. You have to allow yourself to recognize the minutia, mundaneness of it, because that's the reality of our connections. It's not the lightning bolt in the sky that puts the message on the tree that lets you know that it's them. It's the simplicity of recognizing patterns, that every time you think of that person, a certain song comes on the radio, or every time you look down, you find that feather, or you're finding dimes, or you're seeing symbolism and patterns in numbers that intrinsically have something to do with their birth date or their death date or their hospital room that they were in. So the subtlety of that, I think, gets lost on people when they see it depicted in movies and TVs and movies and TV shows and books, where it's portrayed in this like stereotypical, larger than life, over the top mannerism.
Yeah, it really kind of provides a false expectation, because they're waiting for that lightning bolt from the sky to come. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I just had a bird land near me, and there's a dime here, and you're getting all these other messages, and they may be missing it.
I mean, I've literally done readings for people where the information is so spot on, specific. I mean, really spot on, specific, and so direct, and they'll have no reaction. And I literally have that moment of like, I'm sorry, did you hear what I just said? And they'll say, yeah. And then I'll say, is that accurate? And they'll say, yeah. And I'm like, I don't need you to backflip, but can there be some level of reaction? And I don't mean they're in shock and they're not reacting. It's more they're expectant. So when I see that and I feel like somebody's expectant, I'm like, what are you looking for? And what they're looking for is oh my God, I have your mom here, and she's standing behind you, and she's hugging you and sending you love from the afterlife. And, all that show, that whole performance thingy thing that people want is, I think, really, really important to recognize, that's not what you want. You want facts. You want information. Information and facts is what helps let you know that your loved ones and friends are there. It's like giving somebody a Tic Tac when they're hungry if you give them emotion. So I always talk about Maya Angelou and the quote that she has, people forget what you did and said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I'm like, it should never be applied to mediumship.
Oh my gosh, that's so important. Because it really, if you're developing this lifelong connection while we're here, on this plane, we're developing this lifelong connection with spirit. We want to look for the subtleties because it's really developing that relationship.
Yeah. And, I tell people at the end of my events, sometimes I'll bring it up in the middle. It's like, we accept a symbolic form of communication with the living. People constantly text. People don't talk, they text. They're constantly on their devices, texting. I'm like, but something happens when people pass. We automatically don't want to accept a symbolic form of communication any longer. Now we want them to talk. It's like when they were here and they had a physical body and you could talk to Grandma, you didn't go visit her. And now Grandma's passed and you're like, oh, boo-hoo, because Grandma's gone, and you want her to come through with like the Broadway production of Cats from the Afterlife. So it's like, whoa, let's put things in perspective.
I'm just thinking about my grandma doing the Broadway thing of Cats, and while she was a good cook, that wasn't quite her deal. But I understand what you're saying, and it makes perfect sense. And I think bringing expectations to a realistic point of view where it's like, okay, if you're wanting to have this development and this relationship with spirit, this is what it will look like, not the Hollywood amped up version of it.
Correct.
Mm-mm.
There's a book written back in... I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. No, go ahead.
There was a book written back in like the 1990s. It was called Hello from Heaven, and it's written by Bill and Judy Guggenheim. And it's probably to date one of my favorite books on the subject matter. And the reason why I love this book is that there is not a psychic in this book. There is just case studies of everyday people who've made connections with the afterlife. And they just categorically wrote a book, chapter by chapter, of people's experiences. And I think when people read that book, because it's one that I recommend all the time, when people read that book, there's this moment of, oh, I've had that happen. And it gives them the ability to recognize, like, letters. And when you put letters together, they make words. When you put words together, they make sentences. So it gives people the idea of understanding how to recognize what's already taking place around them and don't miss it.
Yeah, pay attention. Really, really pay attention. And that's all it is really being in the present moment many times, right?
Yep.
Gosh,
being aware.
I love that. Well, and this kind of brings me to my next question. Gosh, we'd keep you all day if we could, but I know you're such a busy guy, so we won't do that to you. But you have this community called Evolve. What is that all about? That sounds pretty exciting.
So when I was done with my second television show, I did it for 3 years. And very similar to the psychic fairs, driving to, that one fair that day where I was like, I'm done. I knew I was done. I had done 3 seasons, and it was coming up time where they wanted me to sign on for another 3 seasons, and I produced the show. So it was a great experience, unlike the first one. It was a phenomenal experience. The people that I worked with were awesome. And I had to go to them and basically say, thank you for the opportunity, but I think it's time for me to do what's next. And, there's the initial human side of stuff where they're like, if you're looking for, more money, there's no money here, just sign the budget, let's just keep doing what we're doing. And I said, listen, I've done 2 shows now. Both of them have been syndicated internationally. I've done this. I kind of feel like I have to do what's next. And if I do this, which is really, really easy for me to do, then I'm not going to be challenged and I might not do what's next. I go, so I need to do what's next. And they're like, well, how do we argue with that? I'm like, you kind of can't. So, really thank you for the opportunity. And they were amazing. They basically got it and they let me go. And I then launched what I felt like was supposed to be my next thing, which was I launched an online community, which was like a digital psychic network where I created channels. It's called Infinite Quest. And Infinite Quest had a channel for astrology and numerology and, you name it. And it was my passion project. It was my baby. I couldn't have been more excited. So if you take CNN, you made it psychic, that's what I did. And I did it about 11 years ago, and I did it when it wasn't really popular to have online subscription, all of that stuff. Like, there was no Netflix, there was no Hulu, there was no Amazon, there was none of that. There might have been Amazon, but not like from a TV standpoint. So here I am being the visionary and the pioneer of kind of seeing it and going like, let's do this. And it failed miserably because it was too early. I was too ahead of the curve, and it was too much information. And I basically created a very niche environment for people that they weren't ready for it. So after it failed, my confusion of, I don't get it. Like, I saw it. I saw it, and I saw it working. So after I shuttered it and said, okay, that didn't work, I literally took a beat and I made it just me and just what I do. And it was an overnight success. It was it was an over weekend success. And it worked really, really well. And I'm going to be honest with you, to this day, I really don't understand what beyond the energy of it. There were other people, 59 other people involved with the other version. I still loved what I created and what that was, and the timing of it might have been off. But Evolve is what I'm doing now. It's this online community of people who are coming together to evolve. And it's pretty much all the stuff that we just talked about. And I do an online show. Every Sunday there's a new show that airs for the week. We are in our 11th season. I think we're in 11th season, or in our 10th season going to 11th. I'm losing count now. But we do 2 seasons a year. And I have guests come on. Last Sunday we just had Charlie Goldsmith that was on. He's the healer that's on the show from TLC, called The Healer. So we did a whole episode with him. So it's different from what you would see with Crossing Over. It's different from anything that, I've done before. It's way more teaching. It's way more conversational. But people that are part of the Evolve community, 5 people a month get picked for a private reading, phone reading. 5 people get a pair of tickets to my event. 5 people get a question answered. And then they have access to all the stuff that there's tools online behind a paywall, so that it's just a community that's there. There's a private Facebook group that goes with the Evolve community. And it's just a like-minded bunch of folks coming together to evolve.
I love that. I so like how you're bringing in these other people, like the gentleman you're saying from The Healer. I've seen his show a few times, and bringing him in, so there's a greater discussion on kind of just what's going on there. Because I think a lot of times too, when people are advancing in their own path, they'll want to have greater questions of what does it look like? How does it manifest for other people that are using this towards their own degree of success?
Well, it's like you have this experience of knowing that there's something else out there, and it's like, where do you go to talk about it? Where do you go to, not get attacked for it? Where do you go to learn more about it? So I remember when my aunt was a member of the first site that I did with like all the other stuff going on, and I was like, what do you think? And I remember her reaction. She's like, wow, it's just a lot. I was like, what? She's like, it's like a lot. Like, I don't even know where to look. I don't even know what to, I don't know where to start. So I think the first iteration of what I did was I downloaded everything simultaneously to every member, and they got a little bit about a lot. Here, it's kind of taking people on a journey, and they're finding us when they need to on that journey, and they're able to go back and see some stuff, and they kind of move and join and grow and evolve and transform at the pace that they need to. And I think that's the difference. It's like the evolution is one that's up to the person, not up to me dictating this is how it has to be.
Mm-hmm. Well,
people find that. Yeah, they find it on. I'm sorry, they find that on johnedward.net.
Yes, that's where they can pick that up. It's got its own little tab, and then there's also the store where you've got some other great things as well too. Well, and so yeah. I think we're kind of getting close here. I think I have time for one more question. So, are there any final thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with on? It could be on any topic,
I think we're living at a pretty chaotic and divided time here in the United States for the folks that are listening to it here. And if you're not listening to this here, then you know that from being an outside voyeur of what's taking place. It's really a cosmic division that's taking place because there's global division that's happening as well as a result of what's happening here in our country. And energetically, when I look at like, okay, how did we get here? You know, there's a lot of reasons and a lot of things, and people say, you know, politics and that, but I think it's greater than that when you talk to an astrologer. There's more than that. We had to create the environment. So, you know, if mold is growing in a house, there had to be the environment for the mold to grow. So there's always a cause and effect, reaction, and all of that. So we're here, we're in it, and one of the things that I see that's happening is that people are not listening. People are only yelling. They're not taking a beat, and they're not using compassion or tolerance or understanding. They're using their arsenal of facts and information to get their side to be heard. And what's happening is it's becoming this who could talk the loudest, who could talk over the other person, and they're going back and forth, but no real shifting is taking place. So I'm trying to get people to listen to opposing views without becoming triggered. And then instead of like attacking the person for feeling the way they feel, look beyond that person and try to see what got them to that place. Try to understand what brought them to why they're where they're at. So if you can have understanding of what got them there, and then you become more advanced and evolved in your own positioning of what you know. So like I might not agree with someone, for example, if someone is a cynic and they say that what I do is not possible, I'm clearly never gonna agree with them and say, you know what, Mr. Cynic, you're right. What I do is not real. That's never gonna happen. So we have an example of somebody who has a belief in something and somebody who does not. Ultimately, I think I'm right and they think they're right. But that doesn't stop me from saying, what is it in that cynic's perspective that got them to the place of being so closed, so shut down, so not allowing, so not giving themselves permission to experience that this just might be real? And we're not talking about a skeptic, we're talking about a cynic. And ultimately the answer has always come back, lacking love somewhere in their life. That's usually where that comes from. And I can only say that to you because of the questions that I ask and looking behind that. So I think if people could just take a beat, and whatever that triggered thing is, try to look beyond where is that person coming from. You know, because we don't always understand why someone is like that. I'm not saying that what they're saying or doing is okay. I'm not condoning bad behavior. I'm not condoning in any shape or form any of the things that could trigger somebody. I'm just saying look at opposing view, look at it differently than you have before. Try to take a couple of breaths. Don't attack someone for it. Maybe just validate them and say something like, wow, I never really listened to that. I never heard it said like that. I never really understood it like that. You will make that person feel validated in their place. It doesn't mean you have to agree.
I love that. That is phenomenal, especially because we have such a polarized community as it is.
Oh, God. So much so.
Yeah, that would take a whole nother segment.
No, but it's like it's really how do you get people to evolve? How do you get them to unpack where we're at? It's like, you know, it's great to be able to connect with grandma, and it's great to be able to know that you're a Libra, and it's great to be able to know you're a 9 life path. But guess what? It's how do you put all of this stuff together, and how do you work with it? How do you live, as Oprah says, your best life? Well, you have to apply it. So you have to actually listen, learn, and apply it to what you're doing.
Yeah, and make it usable on this plane. You know,
correct.
You know, having that insight is so valuable because, you know, it's interesting. If we get bogged down with all of the just the kind of the past recordings that our families have the imprints that we have, and we try to push that on other people, of course we're not going to agree. So having that open mind and doing what you suggest makes such a profound change.
100%. I've seen it happen. I've literally watched it happen. And it's hard to do. Like, you know, I say this openly. It's easy to but wow, it's hard to practice. It's like when somebody says to you, oh, you know what, if you go work out on the treadmill and you run 3 miles, you're going to burn fat. Okay, well, you go run 3 miles on the treadmill and tell me how that works. It's like, if you're not a runner, it's after you're like hitting the, 0.10 of a mile, you're like, oh my God, how much more? It's hard. But if you stick with it, then, that 0.10 becomes 0.25, and then that becomes a half mile, and then you hit the mile mark, and you're like, oh my God, I did it. And you benefit from the result.
A beautiful note to end on. And before we let you go, John, where can people learn about your events? Because I know, gosh, you're going to be all over the world. You're all over the map, which is so exciting. So people can see you pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, I feel like I've been on a continual world tour for 25 years. I am going to a lot of different places, and you can find all those places at John Edward. There's no S on Edward, so it's johnedward.net. johnedward.net.
Oh, perfect. Well, John, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and sharing your insights and wisdom with us here today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you. Again, if you're looking to connect with John Edward, you can do so on his website, johnedward.net. And you can find all of his great resources and, of course, connect with him on social media. I'm connected with him. I highly suggest you do the same and make sure to attend one of his upcoming events for his world tour. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.